guys. Wanting to do a live video, basically to catch you guys up on what we've been talking about, and give some of the other guys that are part of this group that haven't been able to make it live with us a chance to catch up and participate, part of the group. So I know that you're here because you want to be. I know that you've shared some, you've expressed wanting to participate, and so I know that not everybody's schedule is would allow everybody to participate at the exact same time. So that's why I'm doing this. I just want to recap. I'm gonna talk about what I talked about in this video the first Thursday that we did. And so let's see here. So I want to start by simply just reading Colossians chapter 1, and I'm just going to read from verse 12 through 23, and this is the I believe this is the CBS translation, in case you're wondering, or in case you're curious. And so here's how it goes. Giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. He had rescued us from the dominion of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. In him we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For everything was created by him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions, or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile everything to himself, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And it goes on. So once you were alienated and hostile in your minds, expressed in your evil actions. But now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death, to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him, if indeed you remain grounded and steadfast in the faith, and are not shifted away from the hope of the gospel that you heard. This gospel has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and I, Paul, have become a servant of it. So I like kind of reading that whole part, this whole part of this chapter 1, only to hopefully give you guys just a solid, more of a solid context as I go on to share. And so in verse 12 is where I want to start, and here's how it reads. Actually, I am going to talk about verse 12 and 13, but I'm actually going to, let's start with 13, and then I'm going to go to verse 12. So 13, I'll read it to you again. He has rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. Alright, set this down. So here's what I want to focus on, and that is dominion of darkness. Alright, and so some of you guys have something different there. You could have power, you could have the word authority, you could have domain, could have a variety of other words there. So, but the big thing to pay attention to is that dominion or domain or authority is, we get that word in the translation through the Greek word that is exousia. That's the word that gives us power, authority, dominion, domain, etc., right? And it comes from, so in the root word of exousia is a compound word, ek, which is the origin and or source. So a source, your water it comes from a source into the house, right? It's not coming out of just your faucet, it's coming from somewhere. The heat comes outside, right? The sun provides the heat. It's the source of what heats up the earth, all right? So that's what ek means. Then we have the second part of that word, that compound word, is aime, which essentially means I am. So you have the source of, and then we have I am. We have source and I am. So essentially, of the source that I am. In this case, it's obviously a negative, because he's rescuing us from the domain, from the source of darkness. All right. So, but a good example of the sourced out of I am would be like John 1, 12, I believe is what it is. So authority could be better understood by the word dominion. And dominion is like the sovereignty or control, reign and rule, and that's dominion. That's authority. So now let's talk about darkness. This is where it gets a little bit fun, I think, because I'm kind of a fan of demystifying words, where it can become practical for us to apply in our lives, our day-to-day lives. And the gospel is practical. It's one of the simplest messages out there. It's beautiful. So darkness, right? The state of being unknown, right? Inconspicuous or unimportant. How about that? That's pretty good. Also, the quality of being difficult to understand. Another one. A thing that is unclear or difficult to understand. Okay. So that in a nutshell is darkness. But here's what it can be understood quite well with this word. Obscurity. Think about it. Obscurity. So metaphorically, of ignorance respecting divine things. To be lost in oneself, or to not know who you are. To forget by which rock you came from, right? I'm sure that that rings a bell in you, that there's something about that. It's like I'm hoping that now you're beginning to connect some dots as to where I'm heading in. So for example, in Colossians 21, which I read to you, everything about the power of darkness or the authority of darkness, and as I've said, the source of our obscurity. Okay? Everything always happens within our minds. Okay? It's the inability to comprehend. It's the place where we comprehend things. And in Colossians 1, chapter 21, it says, once you were alienated and hostile in your minds, expressed in your evil actions. So you know that we were alienated towards God because of the fruit in our lives, because of the evil deeds that we've done in the past before you came to know Christ, right? That's why we have a point of reference when it before we knew Christ and then when we know Christ, and that's how we know. It's a marker. At least for me, it's a marker in my life. I'm going to give you a couple other verses to reference for your own pleasure and for your own, if you wish to dig it out a little more. But everything, again, it's the futility of our mind. Ephesians 4:17, and I'll read it to you, and then you can go back and read it in your own time. This, then, I say, and I testify in the Lord, ye are no more to walk as also the other nations walk in the vanity of their mind. And that word vanity is really interesting. It's where we begin to see the futile of our mind. I've heard it taught in the recent past that is serpentine mind that just goes around in circles over and over and over and over again. It just doesn't, it goes nowhere. And that's what vanity is talking about. Another one, and then also in Ephesians, still in chapter 4, but verse 18, Paul says here, they are darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, and because of the hardness of their hearts. And again, so where do we have understanding? It's in our minds, right? It's where we can comprehend. It's how we learn. I think you get it. Okay. And also, in some verses, you may not have the word "and," or in some translations, you might have. So it might read like, "is in them because," instead of it saying, "is in them and because of the hardness of their hearts." It would read, "and is in them because of the hardness of their hearts." So, some translations will omit the word "and." And another good one, is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. And it reads like this: "In their case, the God of this age has blinded their minds of the unbeliever to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of God, of Christ." So the common thread, as you see it, it's the corruption of the mind. It's not, and you can even take it a step further. So more than just the corruption, this is where you can see the word beguilement. It is the beguilement of our minds, which basically means it's an enchantment or a spell. And this understanding, I think, can bring home what it means to be rescued. That he rescued us from the obscured enchantment understanding towards him. That he would be one that would cause hard labor We know that's not right. His yoke is easy, right? His yoke is light. His words. Okay, so now here's where, so that was my my thoughts there on verse 13, but now I'm going to jump up to verse 12. And I'll just go ahead and read it here. So, giving thanks to the Father who has enabled us to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. And I want to specifically focus on the word enabled. Your translations may have hath made us meet, fitted, qualified, entitled you or us to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. And so so I want to focus on that word enable. And so whichever translation you have, it's that word. So whichever one it is that your translation is using in place of enable. And the reason I wanted to focus on that word was because I knew that immediately when I read this verse, or that word enable, my mindset, my Western mindset, wanted to revert to thinking in the manner of that because Christ has done his part, so then now something is required of me. But that's not the way to read this word. I'm just going to go through a couple little bullet points here to emphasize what enablement or qualified or fitted is not. So again, enable is not a word to be thought of by the works, okay, by what you can do or what I can do. It is not the declaration or the announcement or the excuse of it's now up to you. It's not the power of feeding a good dog versus a lousy dog. It's not the choices we make, although our choices matter. It's not a mind over matter. It's not the attempt of believing more than yesterday or more than your neighbor. It's not the ability to choose him. No, that's not it. He chose you. Therefore, you may in turn choose him. And I'm a big fan of thinking through what it isn't, simply because it helps to make way for what it is. It makes room, I guess, so to speak, in our hearts and our mind to do away with what isn't, to help accept the what is. So enablement is the Godhead living and dwelling inside us. Enable is communion with Elohim. Enable is feasting at his table. Enable is partaking of his accomplishments. Enable is the acceptance of dying with him on the cross, resurrecting from the tomb, ascending with him to the right hand of the Father. Enable is a position of thanksgiving. Enable is love meeting us where we are. And I have a quote here that I want to read to you. I have two quotes. So the first that I want to read to you is a quote from Saint Basil the Great, and it's his comments on Colossians 1 verses 12 and 13. And here's how it reads: God himself has bound the strong man and stolen his goods, that is, humanity itself, whom our enemy had abused in every evil activity. God has created vessels fit for the master's use, and that is us, who have been perfected for every work through the preparation of that part of us which is in our own control. Thus we gain our approach to the Father through Christ, being translated from the power of darkness to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. And then I have another one that I want to read to you, which you've probably already read, and you've read this one as well. But this quote is from George MacDonald, from his book, Unspoken Sermons. And here's how it reads. He says, when a man's evil is thus fading out of him, and he is growing better and better, that is, the forgiveness coming into him more and more, perfect in God's will, it is having its perfect work in the mind of the man. When the man hath, with his whole nature, cast away his sin, there is no room for forgiveness anymore. For God dwells in him, and he in God. With the voice of Nathan, thou art the man. The forgiveness of God laid hold of David. The heart of the king was humbled to the dust. And when he thus awoke from the moral lethargy that had fallen upon him, he found that he was still with God. When I awake, he said, I am still with thee. So, but basically, so in closing, this first little recap is that the issue was never on God's side. The issue was always on our end, which you more than likely already know. And it's within the mind, right? That's the trend that you kind of see in Paul's letters. As I said, in Ephesians, as obviously Colossians, and parts in Corinthians. All right. So, but this is part one, and I'm going to do part two of what we talked about last Thursday, and then you'll be all caught up. And if you can join us live on this coming Thursday, then you'll have a good frame of mind. All right.